In this video, we'll be going over the worst cards in the game which technically have the effect to destroy spell or trap cards, and whose sole focus is on spell or trap cards. And at number 10, we have Tornado. This is a quick play spell card which has the effect to destroy one card in your opponent's spell and trap card zone. Pretty standard effect, most of the cards in this list will have that effect, and what separates them from each other is basically how the card is activated. And for Tornado, this card can only be activated when your opponent controls 3 or more cards in their spell and trap card zone. Now, this card came out when Mystical Space Typhoon was the most played card in the game and limited to 1 copy. Which is kind of hilarious today when we have cards like Twin Twister, Lightning Storm, and Harpy's Feather Duster, which can destroy more spell and trap cards easier. But Mystical Space Typhoon was incredibly valuable back in the day, which could be shown by the fact that it still sees competitive play even to this day, despite the fact that it's been power crept like crazy. The ability to just destroy a spell or trap card on a quick play spell card is just a very useful and versatile combination, especially since it doesn't have a cost either and trades 1 for 1. So Tornado was trying to simulate all of those benefits. It's a quick play spell card, so it can be used on your turn or during your opponent's turn. It doesn't have a cost, but it does have the condition where your opponent needs to have 3 or more cards in their spell or trap card zone. So if the conditions are met, then it's exactly like an MST. Although those conditions were a little bit too much for the card to see play, even when it came out in 2007, but wasn't quite as bad as a lot of the other cards in this list, which is why it's only at number 10. If you met the conditions for this card, it was pretty decent, and the conditions weren't that far-fetched of a field state, so it had potential as a side deck option against a heavy spell or trap focused deck. And at number 9, we have Gryphon's Feather Duster. This card has the effect to only destroy your own spell or trap cards, but at least allows you to gain life points for each card destroyed times 500. Now, the reason this card is at number 1 on this list is because some decks do like to destroy their own spell and trap cards, and Gryphon's Feather Duster has a benefit where its ability to destroy your own spell and traps and gain life points happen simultaneously, so it doesn't cause your cards to miss timing, which is pretty important for a whole bunch of cards that like to be destroyed, like Gear Town, because it notoriously misses timing very easily. Although even with its potential uses, it still never saw competitive play because they were just better cards you could use if you wanted to destroy your own spell and trap cards, mainly Heavy Storm for a long time in the game before the card got banned. Outside of that, they would just use Double Cyclone or just Mystical Space Typhoon to destroy it, because those cards are more versatile and can be used offensively as well. But since technically there are a lot of spell or traps that like to be destroyed, and it does give you a chunk of life points, it is slightly better than a lot of the other cards on this list. And at number 8, we have Hannibal Necromancer. This is a level 4 monster which has the effect that when it's normal summoned you can place 1 spell counter on it, and you can remove 1 spell counter from this card in order to destroy 1 face-up trap card on the field. Now on the surface that doesn't seem so bad. There is a lot of cards with spell counter support, and there's even things like the field spell card, Magical Citadel of Endymion, which would allow you to remove spell counters from the field spell card to activate the effect. But here's the thing, generally, the effect to destroy a face-up spell or trap card is not as good as being able to destroy face-down spell or trap cards, and is obviously worse than being able to destroy a spell or trap card regardless of if it's face-up or face-down position. If we were to rate them, being able to destroy any spell or trap would be a 10 out of 10 in usefulness. Being able to destroy a face-down spell or trap is an 8 out of 10 in usefulness. And being able to destroy a face-up spell or trap would be like a 5 out of 10 in usefulness. That's why cards like Twister saw a whole bunch of competitive play in the past, because there is use in destroying face-up spell or trap cards. Although the usefulness drops even further when you're restricted to only 1 target, spell or traps, rather than either or, and it drops even more in usefulness when it's attached to a monster effect that needs to be normal summoned in order to properly use the effect. If you bring out Hannibal Necromancer from the graveyard, you can't use its effect to destroy cards, unless you have a Magical Citadel of Endymion on the field with spell counters on it already. And when it comes to destroying face-up spells versus traps, it's slightly less useful to destroy trap cards that are face-up on the field, although only slightly, as most floodgates are trap cards. So Hannibal Necromancer's effects when compared to an MST, which would be a 10 out of 10 usefulness, would probably be like a 2 out of 10, i.e. not very good, but usable in some circumstances, especially since it does have spell counter support, is a dark spellcaster type monster, which has a whole bunch of support, So if you just ignored its effect, the card itself can still somewhat be useful, which can't really be said about a lot of the other higher spots on this list. And at number 7, we have Orca Mega Fortress of Darkness. This is a level 5 sea serpent monster which has the effect that if you tribute a torpedo fish on your side of the field, you can destroy one monster. Or if you tribute one cannonball spear shellfish, you can destroy a spell or trap card on the field. Now, even though this is a level 5 monster, if you simply have a legendary ocean on the field, you can normal summon this card from your hand as its level would be reduced to 4. And it even benefits from support like Sea Stealth Attack. And the card has the potential to destroy any spell or trap card, rather than just one specific face-up one like Hannibal Necromancer. Although in order to do that, it needs to tribute a specific monster on your side of the field, which is why this card falls on this list. Having to tribute specific named monsters is pretty difficult, especially when the card itself can't special summon itself, or have an effect to be easily searched out or recycled. As what Cannonball Spear Shellfish does is it's just a level 2 water monster, which is unaffected by spell cards when Umi is face up on the field. So, not very good, and you have to find some way to get both Orca Mega Fortress of Darkness and Cannonball Spear Shellfish on the field if you wanted to destroy one spell or trap card. And that's too much effort for the destruction effects, which could easily be fixed if either Cannonball Spear Shellfish or Torpedo Fish could special summon themselves from the hand while you had an Orca Mega Fortress of Darkness on the field. But since you can't, the cards are kind of useless and just a gimmick that's not even good when it first came out in 2004. The same year we got cards like Chaos Emperor Dragon, Envoy of the End. So, 2004 simultaneously had way too powerful cards, and pretty weak cards like Orca Mega Fortress of Darkness and its combo pieces. And at number 6, we have the Dragon's Bead. This is a continuous trap card which has the effect that if a trap card with an effect that targets a face-up dragon-type monster, and only one dragon-type monster, then you can discard one card from your hand to negate and destroy that trap card. Now for this list, I did try my best to leave off all counter traps, because I can just talk about bad counter trap cards in a different video. But this one is a continuous trap card, so I allowed it to make the list even though it technically has a negate effect. And this negate is pretty specific. For how specific the negate is, it also has a cost for the negate where you have to discard a card. So if you're able to get a single negate with this card, then you're still at a loss in card advantage because you're trading 1 for 1 every time you use the negate. So trap cards that target a singular card do exist in the game, and some of them are not half bad, like Karma Cut, Raigeki Break, or Ballista Squad. Although none of those cards existed when Dragon Beads first came out in 2003, the card wouldn't get a proper target that it would work against until 3 months after it came out at the end of 2003 when Sakuretsu Armor was released. This was an actual good trap card which targeted and saw a lot of widespread play, as it would just destroy a card that attacked. Although Dragon Bead wasn't a very good counter to even Sakuretsu Armor, because you would still lose advantage in the whole exchange and it wasn't good against anything else. So, it may surprise you to hear that Dragon Bead never actually saw competitive play. And at number 5, we have Infernal Flame Emperor. This is a level 9 monster which has a restriction where it cannot be special summoned. But, after this card is properly tribute summoned, it has the effect where you can remove up to 5 fire monsters from your graveyard to destroy a number of spell or trap cards on the field equal to the number of monsters removed from play for its effect. So if you banished 5 fire monsters from your graveyard, you could basically destroy all of your opponent's spell and trap cards, which sounds amazing. Here's the thing though, the card was released in 2005. In 2004, a year earlier, a monster was released known as Mobius the Frost Monarch, which, for only 1 tribute, allowed you to destroy up to 2 spell or trap cards on the field when it was tribute summoned, without having to banish a whole bunch of cards from your graveyard as an extra cost. Now, Mobius the Frost Monarch did see competitive play over the years, even though it was considered one of the weakest of the monarchs, and Infernal Flame Emperor was just kind of laughably bad in comparison. It had all kinds of restrictions on its destruction effect, setup required, and 1 more tribute, when you could essentially accomplish the same thing for 1 less tribute without any other kind of setup with a Mobius the Frost Monarch. Because sure, the potential to destroy 5 spell or traps is pretty good, but it requires way too much and is too restrictive for that kind of effect, as banishing 5 monsters in order to do all that is kind of a lot, as only 3 years later they released Judgment Dragon, which only required you to have 4 different named Lightsworn monsters in your graveyard to just bring the card out and had the effect of destroying all the cards on the field. And Judgment Dragon required some work to bring out as well, and its entire deck revolved around putting cards in the graveyard, whereas fire monsters are not as proficient at doing the same thing. Even today, it's kind of difficult to get 5 fire monsters in the graveyard quickly, while also providing tribute fodder for this card, and all you get is the potential to destroy more cards than Mobius the Frost Monarch, which isn't really worth it, and is kinda bad. And at number 4, we have Commander of Swords. This is a trap card which can only be activated during your opponent's draw phase, where you then get to reveal the card they drew, and if it's a spell or trap card, you get to choose one of 2 of the following effects to activate, where you can discard the cards they drew, or destroy 1 spell or trap card they control. So essentially it's a gamble card that might allow you to destroy a spell or trap card, unless you know for sure what the top of your opponent's deck is. But even if you do have a way to gain vision on the top of your opponent's deck without having to use another card, or lose advantage, like maybe using some kind of skill and duel links, the effect of these cards are just kind of normal, and not really worth the gambling in order to activate them. If you really want to discard the cards your opponent draws, you can just use Drop Off or Drastic Drop Off. If you just want to destroy 1 spell or trap card, then there's a whole plethora of other cards which can do that without requiring gambling, and that are better because they can be used outside of your opponent's draw phase. If you really want to gamble and destroy spell or trap cards, then you're better off using something like Typhoon, which also has a 2/3 chance to destroy a spell or trap card, but can be used during your turn since it's a quick play spell, and has the potential to destroy 2 spell or traps if you roll a 5 with its effect. Plus, there's the fact that most decks play more monsters and spell and traps anyway, so the chances of them having a spell or trap on the top of their deck are actually lower than 2/3. So, Commander of the Swords is kind of worse than Typhoon, unless you have a way to know for sure what's on top of your opponent's deck, like if you're playing a Spiral deck or something. Although Spiral decks would definitely not play this card either, because they're kind of a good archetype and they wouldn't use it. And at number 3, we have Mystical Wind Typhoon. This is another lesser version of Mystical Space Typhoon like Tornado that was released when Mystical Space Typhoon was the most popular card in the game and limited to 1 copy. And this one, just like Tornado, has the effect to destroy 1 spell or trap card in the field and is a quick play spell card, but has a restriction where it can only be activated as a Chain Link 3 or higher. And activating a Chain Link 3 or higher is kind of difficult unless you're specifically trying to do it. There is a popular burn deck called Chain Burn, which is all about getting high chain links so that you can use Chain Strike in order to inflict a whole bunch of effect damage to your opponent. So, in a deck like that, where getting high chain links is pretty regular, then Mystical Wind Typhoon seems like it would be the perfect addition, and be used just essentially like a normal Mystical Space Typhoon would. Here's the thing though, burn decks don't care at all about destroying your opponent's spell or traps. They only care about cards which inflict burn damage or allow you to draw more cards. So in the one type of deck where this card would be live the most often, it would never see play because they literally don't need its effect. And in normal decks that aren't trying to hit high chain links intentionally, would rarely be able to use the card because you don't really go to high chain links very often, unless you have a whole bunch of effects going off at once from the same cards, which this card has built-in protection from, where it can only be activated if they're different named cards in that chain link. So at least Tornado has a possible game state where it can be used, and pretty easily, i.e. against decks that run a heavy amount of spell or trap cards. Whereas Mystical Wind Typhoon isn't even useful in the kinds of decks that can use it easily, and is too cumbersome to use in normal decks that might want to be able to destroy spell or traps. So, it makes a high spot on this list as one of the worst back row removals. And at number 2, we have Remove Trap. This is one of the earliest back row removals in the game, released alongside cards like Dispel. Remove Trap only allows you to destroy 1 face-up trap card on the field, whereas Dispel allows you to destroy 1 spell card on the field, regardless of whether it's face-up or not. So Dispel was actually useful and saw competitive play, whereas Remove Trap wasn't as useful, but probably saw competitive play sometimes just because there were no better options in the early days of the game. Although, once better options became available, it definitely stopped being used at all because, like I mentioned with Hannibal Necromancer, only being able to destroy face-up trap cards is kind of low on the totem pole of useful spell and trap card destruction effects. And that's the only thing this card can do. at least Hannibal Necromancer could be used as a monster as well, and enjoys a healthy amount of support, whereas Remove Trap is just a spell with this one effect, which isn't even that useful. If it allowed you to just like face down trap cards like D-Spell did, then it wouldn't even make this list because that wouldn't be half bad. But since it's only face-up traps, that is enough of a distinction for it to be kind of too restrictive to be useful. And at number 1, we have a dual spot with Gust and Driving Snow. Gust has the effect that it can only be activated when one or more of your spell cards has been destroyed and sent from your field to the graveyard by an opponent's card effect, where you then gain the effect to be able to destroy one spell or trap card on the field. And Driving Snow has the exact same effect, except its conditions are if one or more of your trap cards are destroyed and sent from your field to the graveyard. Both of these cards can only be activated in response to one of your cards already being destroyed and sent to the graveyard, where then you get to destroy one spell or trap card your opponent controls. So the intended use of this card is pretty obvious. These cards were designed in a way to get back at your opponent when they destroyed some of your spell or traps, being able to destroy one of your opponent's spell or trap cards afterwards. And it is a 1-for-1 in the process, so it seems fair enough. Although these two cards themselves could be targeted by your opponent's blind destruction effects, and they wouldn't be able to destroy any spell or trap cards at all. And there's also the fact that usually you want to be able to destroy a spell or trap card whenever you want, and it's not very good effect to have on a condition that you don't have any control over. If your opponent simply never destroys any of your spell or trap cards, then you can never use these cards because it's entirely dependent on an opponent's action. Granted, there is a high probability that your opponent will destroy one spell or trap card during the course of a duel, but even then, that doesn't mean your opponent will have something you want to destroy right away either, and there's no guarantee they'll even have spell or trap cards for you to destroy when this card's conditions are met. These two purely make the top of this list for having the harshest conditions to activate for its ability to destroy spell or traps, as you can't really control when these cards are able to be activated, and they're not good enough for you to want to try to activate them yourself, as there are ways to force your opponent to destroy your back row. But in decks that do try to force their opponent to destroy their own back row, they wouldn't use these two cards because there's just no point. They would just be dead cards most of the time, and there's a lot of other cards you could use that do what they're trying to do but better, without any restrictions or limitations to their effects. Although these two cards first came out in the early days of the game, as they were released in one of the first sets, there wasn't much spell or trap card removal yet, but even then they didn't use Driving Snow or Gust. And generally, you'd want to prevent your cards from being destroyed, and not destroy cards after one of your cards has already been destroyed. So they weren't even that useful in their intended use, which is why they barely take the number 1 spot on this list, being slightly less usable than cards like Mystical Wind Typhoon or Commander of Swords. Alright, and that's the list. I hope you enjoy these worst of videos because I really like talking about non-meta cards in these videos. If you have any ideas for future videos just like this one, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments. And also, if you're new to the channel, I have a huge playlist with all my other top 10s that is over 150 videos long now, all done in the same style as this one, and definitely worth a binge watch sometime in the future, as statistically, around 65% of the people watching these videos are not subscribed to the channel.